All right, everyone, welcome back to episode number 3 of Scouting Sessions. I'm Jérôme Bérubé, and I'm joined by my co-host Brad Allen. So, Brad, this is the part of the podcast that you and I make like a fake podcast conversation. So, let me ask you this: what is your favorite ice cream flavor? Don't answer. Don't answer now. I'm gonna give some people some insight on this because people don't notice. Brad is very passionate about hockey, but also very passionate about ice cream. Um,
Sure.
when you and I were together at the 2022 NHL draft, you were here for basically a week in Montreal. I believe one of your highlight of that week was when my wife and I brought you to Ben and Jerry to get some ice cream in Montreal. So again, what is your favorite ice cream flavor, and tell the viewers how much you love ice cream.
I don't think I have to tell them. I can just show them. You can see it. Yeah. Definitely love some ice cream. It's definitely scouting fuel for me. Well, I have like a soft spot in my heart for some classics like Neapolitan because my grandfather grew up on that. So that's a memory I have. So I have a good association with Neapolitan as like a base. But like in terms of like brands and stuff. Like I'm a huge fan of like classic vanilla bean Haagen-Dazs. That's one of the most underrated vanillas on this earth. If you want to get advanced, you're talking about making your own ice cream. For you beer winemakers, like I like soaking oak in milk. Oak chips actually really work in ice cream. So a vanilla oak salted matcha caramel is probably my go-to. That's the one I make people that surround me. That's the one that's always classically requested if I go anywhere and going to a potluck, doing a dinner party, whatever. That's the one. So those would be three of the big ones for sure.
I promise, if you guys keep watching the scouting session, there will be more ice cream segment maybe in the future, or at least some inside
I'll leave
joke.
recipes. I'll leave
Yeah.
some recipes if people want them. Just ask, request them. I'll put them in the comment section.
Listen, if anybody has a ice cream company or something and wants to sponsor a segment on this podcast, we're gonna
Come to
we're
us.
gonna
We're your people.
please reach out to me. I will make it happen. Anyway, back to hockey. This is episode number 3. In episode 1, we talked about the Pacific Division. Episode number 2, we talk about the Central Division, and today we're going to talk about the Atlantic Division, which has quite a few big market with obviously Montreal, Boston, Toronto, Detroit. So pretty excited about talking about the prospect of those teams. So as a reminder, you can follow this on your screen. We're going to show you every top 10 rankings from each team, but also you can go on hockeyprospect.com. You got the full list there. You can follow with that as well. So let's get this started. So we start with the Boston Bruins. The Boston Bruins, who it's funny, like the Bruins are, to me, every time they make selection, I'm often scratching my head about some of their picks, and then a few years later, that player has become a decent part of their team. Perfect example, Mason Lohrei. When he was drafted, we didn't have him ranked. We didn't, like, we knew who he was, but we didn't really believe him as a draft prospect. They got him in the second round. I don't think we're alone here. I think a lot of people didn't really know him. He was a second year eligible prospect, and then he's now becoming like a full-time NHL player. He was basically a full-time NHLer last year. We still put him in the ranking here because he has not played like 82 full NHL games, but obviously he's going to be a regular this season unless something really bad happened in training camp coming up. So I think you and I, Brad, have talked about this in the past. We feel like the Bruins have a really good development staff. They do a really good job, developing players after they're drafted. So I think that's the key for the Bruins. They do really a good job with that. They don't have a lot of draft picks also in the past few years, so it's showing a bit here. But they have found some decent player over the years. Obviously, Lohrei being one. Matthew Poitras, we ranked number 3, was definitely a guy that we were not high on in his draft year. We saw a smart player, like very good playmaker, but he was a smaller player, and his skating was just, we didn't think his skating was good enough. Well, a year later, he's playing in NHL. So we kind of looking bad a bit here on that one. The rest of the top 10, listen, not exactly a very deep group. I have time for actually a guy from the Q here, Frederic Brunet, who's a 6'3" lefty. The Bruins got him in the 5th round in 2022. He's a really good athlete. I think he's going to take a few years in the American Hockey League, but he's got some talent. He's still a bit raw, but he's an interesting project. They got him in the 5th round. I think they drafted him based on his athletic ability, and and then you got the development staff working with him, improving his game. Anybody, Brad, you want to quickly mention here from that top 10 here?
Yeah, I'll say that Don Milas has developed semi-well. I know he didn't put up much production in his college year there, but in terms of like his U20 performances internationally and where he was relative to where he's going from J20, I think he has a chance to be a depth forward that can be very useful as a Swiss Army knife, like high energy style type of player. The other I'll highlight, who I think is like one of the more underrated goalie prospects in the game, is Bussey. Brendan Bussey is real. I think Brendan Bussey, it'll be very interesting to see with the Swayman contract talks and negotiations, see how far that plays out. If it ends up where there's a real stalemate and Swayman's not in camp yet, Bussey's going to get maybe an opportunity here to showcase himself. But I'm sure Boston fans listen to this. You saw him last year in the preseason when he shut out the Rangers. When he is in the peak performance mode, he absolutely looks like a full-time NHL goalie. The question is the consistency rates. Can he be mentally consistent enough to be a starter? And that's the real question, because he has the athletic traits. Actually, we'll be talking about him here in a bit, but one of my comps for Timofey Avintsev was Brendan Bussey. Timofey Avintsev and Brendan Bussey share a lot of similarities. In fact, in terms of the fact that they're both very raw when they were in their draft years, their initial draft year of eligibility, but they also had a tremendous amount of athletic talent and raw instincts that you could hone. So I'm a huge believer in Brendan Bussey as at least a backup in the NHL. I think he could be maybe even more than that, depending on how he does mentally here. So he's one for me that could really kind of emerge out of nowhere for Boston. And Boston, as you said, like, I've got an opportunity to talk to a couple of their higher up execs, and it's pretty interesting to talk to them and figure out what's going on in terms of their development strategy. So one thing I can share with everybody is that they make sure that the top of the organization, in terms of player charts, there's a trickle down effect, meaning players like Patrice Bergeron when he was still with the team, Brad Marchand, those types of players would be communicating a lot more often than you see in other organizations with the prospects that they just brought into the organization. So it creates an immediate connection. And I think it creates one of those effects where the prospects feel, they feel they're coming from junior systems mostly, and they're out of nowhere, they're getting drafted. Now they're talking to NHL stars that actually have vested interest in them. I think that probably goes a long way into their commitment and their process of wanting to actually be able to make it. I know, for instance, like Brad Marchand, he's one of those types of players off the ice. For everything he does on the ice that some people don't like, he's apparently incredible off the ice with the younger kids. He really goes out of his way to try to help them in any way he can in terms of their development. So I think really it comes from the leadership. They have incredible leadership there. There's a trickle-down effect. There's tremendous communication, and everybody has a buy-in. As a result of that, you get players that accelerate the development, like Matthew Poitras, who's absolutely annihilated our ranking of him. So it's just one of those situations, too, where if you look at some of their picks, like Poitras, Mason Lohrei, like Andrew Gassot falls in this category. Georgi Merkelov falls in this category. Not great skaters. They have no problem developing the skating bases of these players. So that's another thing is, like, again, we talked about it the other day, is like certain teams are more comfortable with taking players that need more work with their skating mechanics. Toronto, Tampa Bay, Boston's another team that's willing to do that.
Yeah, I'm actually going to be curious about Poitras. Like, you really had a hot start last season, then he cooled off, and then he went to the U20. Was not a good showing by by him, but I mean the team overall was not really good. And then he got hurt, and then he didn't play in the second half of the season. So I'm curious how is he going to look in camp? And now he's AHL eligible, so I'm wondering if that might be an option to, for his development, maybe to go play maybe a few months in the American Hockey League if depending how he's doing in camp. So that's going to be, to me, maybe a storyline to follow in camp. How's Patras doing, and is he ready to really make like a big step up this season at the NHL level? And if he's not, probably it would not be a terrible idea to send him back to the American Hockey League to have a good program there to make him a better hockey player. So it's maybe a storyline to follow in camp. Moving on, Buffalo Sabres, as you see the top 10 here. Pretty solid top 10, Brad. Lots of players that, if you look here, Consta Elanius obviously was a very solid player in the draft this past season. Devon Levi, a guy that I've been watching for many years. He's one of those smaller goalie that will have an impact at the NHL level. Jiri Kulich looks like he's going to challenge, be a serious challenge to win a roster spot with the Sabres this season. He just had 2 really good years at the AHL level at 18 and 19, which is a bit uncommon, to be honest. Noah Ostlund, Komarov was a guy I think is pretty underrated. I've really enjoyed watching him play in the Q the past 3 seasons. Really big improvement from him. I remember when he came over from Russia, my first few viewings of him, I was like, oh, this guy can't skate. And at the end of the year, I'm trying my best to move him up, on our draft list at the end of the year. So, and he made even more progress at 18 and 19. Like he was, he's a big right defenseman. He's mean. He's smart. He's got underrated skill. The skating is still the question mark with him. But I think he's got too much elsewhere to not at least be at least a third pairing shutdown defenseman. Novikov is kind of like in a similar boat, but as a lefty. He had a pretty good first year in the AHL after coming over from Russia. So he's a very interesting one. Maxim Sturbach, he's a funny one. Maybe Brad, we can touch on him because he's, depending where we watch him, he's either really good or very, very passive. So maybe if you want to touch on him, because after him, Wahlberg is a very interesting project. Big kid, obviously skates well, but the hockey sense is the big issue with him. And Bodie Zimmer is also a guy we really like in last year's draft, and he's another guy where the skating is a bit of an issue going forward.
Yeah, I love Brody. I thought it was a fantastic pick by them. I'm a huge Brody Zimmer fan. I feel like he's one of those kids who's just going to figure it out. He's going to find a way. There's just too much will, too much want. And yeah, it's ugly mechanics, but his A to B, I think there's enough power there where he'll be okay long term. And it just complements the line so well. He's what they need. Like, I wish he was a bit bigger, obviously, but he's what they need. They need a player like him to be able to insulate their lines because they're not the biggest forwards that they have come into the system. So Devon Levi is a very interesting situation, Jerome, because they signed James Reimer. So that's interesting. They got Luukkonen and they got Reimer. So I assume that means they want to keep Levi down for a bit longer, which is interesting. They want to give him as much reps as they can. But yeah, Kulich's ready. Like, Kulich's development is unbelievable. I still remember when we watched him in Extra League in Czechia before we saw what he was at the U18s. And it's so, sometimes I know for you listening, you get an opportunity to see some of these kids when they're in their league play at a men's level in their draft year, and then you see them, it's just night and day sometimes. It's very tricky balancing act, trying to figure out exactly where they're going to be. Like, if none of us saw Jiri Kulich at the U18s, like, where would people have placed him, right? Like, he was not the same player. Like, he wasn't as confident. He had the worst passing rates out of any player I was tracking in league play in that draft year. You know, he was, and he wasn't nearly as dangerous off the rush either. You know, obviously, he's playing against men, but it's just unbelievable development curve. Reminds me a little bit of JJ Peterka's. We were more bullish on Peterka at the same time, at the same time in their development path when they were first draft eligible. But Peterka's been lights out in terms of his curve. I think Peterka probably hits close to 70 points this season. And Kulik's one of those situations where I think he can come in and probably really end up doing some damage early. So that would be the name coming in that I think does the most damage. But Maxime Strbak, to Jerome's point, I mean, you just in the Black Book, I use it every year. I always try to use this quote because sometimes it just sums up some of these players so much. Life is a box of chocolates. Don't know what you're going to get, right? He's the Forrest Gump of this prospect pool because internationally he looks like an absolute bona fide top 4 defenseman, and then you see him in league playing, you're like, hey, he's never playing. It's like there's no in between with him. It's so strange how different he can look depending on the system and depending on how comfortable he is. But yeah, I think the huge thing for Buffalo is you might have 2 massive wins in the back half of the draft for those 2 Russian defensemen. You just need one of them. You don't even need both. You just get one of them. If they're good quality third pairing defensemen, it's enormous. It's an enormous win for Buffalo. It's exactly what Buffalo needs. And they're both tracking well. They're both tracking fantastically. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens to them. The other thing I'll mention about Buffalo is, some organizations, they shy away from drafting Russians too high or drafting Russians in general. Like that's not the case with Buffalo, obviously. Buffalo has no problem drafting Russians all over the map and trying to fit them into the lineup. And what's very interesting about them is like Russian defensemen, their rate of success relative to forwards is way lower. And goalies, not even close. Like Russian goalies are the best in the world. And then like defensemen is kind of the weakness when it comes to Russian development. Yet here they are with 2 of them. So that's pretty unique as well. Obviously, in the case of Kamarov, he was playing in the queue, which probably helped his development. But still, it's pretty rare to see that.
Yeah, and obviously, like this is pretty good depth on that. Even guys that are not ranked. I mean, we rank Isaac Rosen number 10, but there was like a pretty good debate going on between him, Prokhor Poltapov, and Viktor Nuchev. So we went back and forth on those 3, and we decided to keep Rosen at number 10. But Poltapov is off to a really good start in the KHL, and obviously Nuchev is at the Buffalo camp right now. But they have some depth, some guys that are not ranked in the top 10 that are a pretty good player, and they're maybe a skill away from really being really good. Nuchev's case is the skating. Poltapov is the hockey sense. So it's very interesting, and yeah, Buffalo has not shy away from drafting Russians. We'll see if it pans out in the future. I remember when they drafted Kisakov really, really early in the second round. I was a bit blown away by that one. I don't think that one is working out, but like the other Russians that they draft have worked out so far with Novikov, Komarov, Poltapov, Nuchev. So pretty nice prospect pool for the Sabres, but in reality, the Sabres, they need to start winning some hockey games. So I wouldn't be surprised to see some of those prospect maybe used as trade potential in the future in the next year or 2. Moving on to the Detroit Red Wings, as you see, Simon Edvinsson is the number 1 ranked prospect. We have been a huge fan of Edvinsson since his U17 season. I remember watching him in different tournaments that year. I was like, whoa, this kid's got something. And then we finally rank him 3rd overall in his draft year, but we also knew he was going to take a bit longer to get where he needs to be. I think right now he's NHL ready, as he showed that at the end of the year. Sebastian Cossa, I mean, another 6'6" player, a goalie this time. Maybe Brad, you're going to touch on him, but with every big, tall goalie like him, you just need to be patient. Like his first pro year, he played mainly in the East Coast Hockey League. Not exactly what you want from your first round pick, but at this point in his development, he just needed to play. So the East Coast League was the best place for him to get as much games as possible. And the rest of the top 10 here is pretty solid. Sandin Pellikka is very brilliant, small puck moving defenseman with excellent skating ability. Casper, Nygaard, Danielson, even Trey Augustine, like he's a pretty solid goaltender. A bit on the, he's under 6'2", so I guess he's categorized as a smaller goalie now, but he's a pretty good goalie. So, Brad, anybody you want to maybe focus a bit more here on the Red Wings?
Yeah, Red Wing fans, don't give up on Elmer. That's Soderblom had a down season for the first time in 3 years, but I still am a huge believer in Soderblom. I think he's going to be still a very unique, very special a player who I think he's going to hit second line still. I'm still going with my second line projection with Soderblom. I really think he can get there. Just such a unique player. There's nobody like him in the game. If he could see the ice better than he does, then he would be really special. But he'll still be an incredibly useful player that's obviously a one-off. Like there's nothing like him in the history of the NHL, really. Like Tage Thompson's the closest comp, but the way they operate is pretty different. The only thing, I mean, if he was mean, if he had some sandpaper to him, like I can't even imagine how useful he'd be. That's the other thing. He's too nice. He's a Swede. All my Swedish friends are like the nicest people I've ever met. It's like that's the problem with them is like they don't have a mean streak in them, because if Soderblom had a mean streak at 6'8", 250, that would go a really long way. But it's not gonna develop. He's a finesse driven player. But once he gets more comfortable dictating and driving possession down low, he's going to be an incredible player for Detroit for a long time. The other thing I'll say is you look at their goaltending. Where does it fall? Probably top 3-4 in terms of goaltending depth long term, like you from an organizational perspective. I'm very high on both. Kosa, Augustine's coming off a very good season. So it's one of those situations where like I look at some of my other, like Dustin Wolf, Kirill Zarubin comes to mind. Timofey Avintsev, Dennis Hildeby, I think is a very good, interesting pairing in terms of looking long term and going forward with that. Vegas is up there, but like you can make an argument Detroit's like arguably one. Like that's how good Kosa and Augustine can both be. So that's like very important for your organization going forward for obvious reasons. The other thing I'll say is that I really like the fact that there's a lot of forwards that actually can play defense on this list. Like, usually with prospects, you're talking about their offense and then you're hoping that the defense can emerge over time. They become a 200 player. But if you look at Marco Kasper, Michael Bransick-Nygaard, Nate Danielson, Carter Mazur, like these players can play defense. That's one of the bit they can really defend well. They're well rounded. That's the one that like Nygaard is a very good pressure oriented player off the forecheck. He can hit. He can be mean after the whistle. He makes up for a bit of that sandpaper lacking in Soderblom. And then defensively, like you can't teach Soderblom's range, and he knows how to use it to pickpocket players. And Mazur has no problem going to the dirty areas and winning pop battles along those boards and defending properly. And Nate Danielson, I think, could become one of the best shutdown centers in the NHL. Will he ever end up like 60, 70 point player? I doubt it. But will he become a 45, 50 point center that's incredibly useful when it comes to shutting down top opposition? I think so. I think that's very possible. One of the best skaters too. So I just really like the fact they have a mix that can come in and kind of operate in any way you need them to within a structure. I think that gives Detroit long-term a lot more variables, a lot less variables to have to take into consideration when it comes to how they're going to fit certain players in their lineup. Right. So that's what Detroit really has in spades. I know publicly a lot of people are making fun of Detroit and the fact that it's like, oh, great, you drafted another third liner. But like that's not completely true. I don't think like Michael Bransick-Nygaard has the potential to be a second liner. Marco Kasper, if things go right, could be that too. Nate Danielson, hey, I just said I think he's probably more of like a top 9 guy as a shutdown guy, but these guys have talent. They all have talent. So it's one of those situations where I also really like their floors. Like these are high floor players. I'd be very surprised if they're like, you look at the top 10, usually after the first 4 or 5 names, you're like, oh, okay, yeah, they could hit, but in Detroit system, I actually think there's more of a projection there where you can say, yeah, most of these kids are going to play.
Yeah. And it's pretty close. Honestly, we rank it like Kasper, Nygaard, Danielson. Anybody can make an argument. It should be the opposite or any way they want it. Like it's really close. It's funny, like they drafted Kasper in 2022, and when they draft Danielson in 2023, I just said, "Hey, they draft the same player." So, like, as far as like projection goes, it's pretty similar. Both are really, as you said, Brad, like very good defensively. Both can really skate. And Nygaard is, just an incredible shot. Can really score. He could end up scoring 30 goals per season at the NHL level. He's just and physically he's a beast. So there's a lot to like here with those three players. And obviously Pellikka will probably end up being their power play quarterback when he's NHL ready. A bit undersized, but in Detroit he's going to be surrounded by Slider, Edvinson, so he's going to be fine. Moving on to Florida Panthers here. Florida, not a lot of draft picks in the last few years, so it's hurting a bit their prospect pool, as you see here. Sam Moskevich at number 1, Linus Eriksson, a guy from last year's draft, at number 2, Justin Sordiff at number 3, Matvei Sherevin at 4, Kirill Gerasimyuk at number 5, Sachin Davies, Benning, Usher, Naus to finish the top 10 here. Maybe the one guy I might mention here is Linus Eriksson. He's a guy who seemed like a very safe pick at the draft last season. So those are a bit sometimes tough to evaluate or try to rank, because you might be like a very safe prospect, but if something doesn't go well in your development, you might not play. So, but I think where the Panthers got him, it's perfectly like a really good pick for them. They got him at 58. We had him at 42. So that seems like it's just they had him in the same range as us. So he's an interesting one. He's playing with Djurgården in the second pro league in Sweden. Super smart player. Was a captain of the Swedish national team last season. So he's an interesting one to see how he's going to do like full time this season at the pro level. But he did pretty well in a short sample at the pro level last season. He actually did better at the pro level than he did in junior in my viewings. Maybe Brad, I don't know if you want to talk about Matvei Sherevin, but he's a guy we kind of like struggle a bit with him last season, and the Panthers got him at 97. We had him 48. But at some point, he was a guy that was tracking as a first-round pick. So maybe if you want to touch on him a bit.
Sure, yeah, I've been watching Chris Naya already this season, so yeah, he's improved. He's the big thing with him is kind of like Willander's issue, where it's like the handling rates are all over the map. Like he's got to have basic handling so that he can like mask his passing options on his exits, because that was one of the big issues with him last season. He's improved on that already this year. He's quarterbacking the top power play unit, which gives him a lot more reps, which is exactly what he needs. And that like his frame and skating combination is fantastic. He's not like the most intense defenseman you've ever seen, but he is willing to play the body at the right times. His gaps are good. I feel like he's the dark horse in this group. It's like, oh, who's, like he's the Russian defenseman to me last season, where it's like if things go right, then Florida could really get something here. The other player I'll mention that's like really improved is Josh Davies. Right? Like in his draft year, he was just like a human fire hydrant who like could skate like the wind north south, and he had no understanding of the game at all. Just no attention to detail, didn't know how to incorporate his teammates, couldn't see the ice. Like I've never seen him make a lateral pass correctly in my life. And then this last season, well, I don't know what they're telling him, but it's working because he's a different beast. Josh Davies, look for Josh Davies to be a pretty unique depth forward. That he might be small, but he's mighty. He's a human fire hydrant. The kid's a beast. So I think he might be one of the more underrated prospects when it comes to depth prospects that people don't really know that might actually have a significant chance of playing. The other I'll talk about Linus Eriksson. Like caveat there is like we do know their agent. I've traveled with the skills coach for Linus Eriksson. So what's interesting about him is in J20, he was under point per game, or roughly point per game, and he had 5 goals in 20 games, Jerome, which is not good for J20 hockey. You need to do better than that in order to show that you have enough offensive potential to be an NHL or in any capacity. But then he moved to the Allsvenskan, and as Jerome mentioned here, did a lot better. One of the reasons why is his skills coach changed his stick. He actually shaved down his stick, decreased the length, and that really helped him connect or basically chain his handling plays into his playmaking. And that's what his game is. His game is based off of his skating and playmaking combination. So it kind of took off, and that was one of the reasons that he is now looking like a bona fide prospect. Not ever going to be a high-end goal scorer. He's going to be more a net front guy, get the redirects, get the dirty goals. Occasionally, yes, he'll score from distance, but it's rare. But that's not what he's not coming in to be that. He's coming in to be a very useful 200-foot center that's incredibly reliable. I think he's one of the most reliable players in last year's class, one of the most mature players in last year's class, and he's a pretty strong kid too. So I feel like Florida's group is unique and kind of underrated. Like there's a lot that could go right here with Josh Davies and Matvei Sheruvin, also Kirill Grosimiuk I haven't touched yet. Kind of a unique path in the sense that they actually didn't move him up to the VHL last season, which is pretty rare. Like they actually cooked put him in the oven and baked him a long time there. So I like that. I think that's not a bad thing for his development. I'm a big fan of Grosimiuk. We actually had him as the second ranked goalie in his draft year, Jerome. If I can't remember, I think that was in 2022. So Grosimiuk has a tremendous amount of potential. And Spencer Knight, who knows, right? We're going to see what Spencer can do this season, but Bobrovsky's not getting any younger. So by the time that Bob is out, and by the time that Spencer Knight hits his stride, hopefully Grosimiuk has a real chance to coming over and maybe even split starting. That's how high I am on him. So, and then you got Grayson Sachin. We haven't talked about him. That's a unique player. We'll see what happens there. And Mackey's out of college. I was a little worried about him. Way too much lateral drags, lateral drags every second play. But he's already that's the thing. You don't really know what a player is until they go to the pro ranks. You really don't. I know for some of you who've already seen our rankings, there's Colby Barlow's too high. The thing is, we don't really know what Colby's going to be until he hits the AHL. Then you'll find out some truths, right? It's just a lot of these kids can get away with things once they get drafted in the CHL. Right. So in Mackey's case, it was the same thing. He was on a powerhouse team in the USHL. Then he gets to college. Now he gets to play hero puck or whatever you want to call it. And now it's one of those situations where he finally gets to play the right way, play in a structure, actually use his playmaking and skating combination to his advantage. And he's looked really good. Him and Justin Sourdif both have looked very good in the A. They're knocking on the door. I won't be shocked at all if both get a lot of games this season, actually.
Yeah. Let's move on to the Montreal Canadiens, who have a pretty deep prospect pool. So obviously, Ivan Demidov is the player everyone is talking. Well, they're talking not a lot about Leonardson recently in Montreal, but obviously this summer Ivan Demidov was the big storyline. He's in the KHL now with playing on the third line with Evgeny Kuznetsov, Reinbacher, Hudson. I think me personally, I did kept Reinbacher there. This might look like a bad ranking in 2-3 years, but if Hudson hits and he becomes something of a Adam Fox / Quinn Hughes, yes, this is going to look like a bad ranking. But there's still some question mark about his defending, his skating, mostly his backward skating, his skating to defend. And Reinbacher, I was a bit worried about how he played in Switzerland last season, but when he played in the American Hockey League at the end of the year, he did really well. And, quite frankly, there's just a lot more of guys that look like David Reinbacher succeed in the playoff than Leonardson. It's very likely that Leonardson's going to have a better career. The risk, there's still some risk to his game. And while Reinbacher might not be flashy, there's not much risk. He's just going to be a solid pro. I think he's going to be something like Kaden Guhle, but like a right-handed version of Kaden Guhle. So that's a bit how I see it. And so we'll see. The rest of the top 10 here, Jacob Fowler, really nice pick by Montreal, 69 overall in 2023. We had him 46. I believe he was our third ranked goalie, if I'm not mistaken, or fourth ranked goalie, but he was pretty high on our list. Logan Mailloux made some pretty big stride last season in Laval. Didn't start well. I remember going to a few games in Laval and he was, really bad. I think once Jacky got sent down to Laval, they put those two together and his game really got better. And even when Jacky left to go back to Montreal, Mayu was really good. I mean, he played in the All-Star game. His toolkit is incredible. Like, he's a 6'3" right D, moves so well on the ice. It's so effortless out there for him. And he's got some physicality, some pushback. What he needs to improve is is defense, which has made some stride, but it's still not. He's still not at a level where I think I would like trust him full time at the NHL level. We'll see how he does in camp. Obviously, he did pretty well against the Leafs in those 2 rookie games, but those games don't really matter. So the main thing he has to work on is under pressure, like not be more careful with the puck. His puck management has to be better. So that's some of the things he needs to work on. I think he needs more games. If you look at, in junior, obviously at 16 he played junior B. Then at 17 he was in Sweden. Then his 18 years old season he played 12 games. He was suspended for half the season. Came back, played 12 games, hurt his shoulder, season done. Basically in junior he only had 1 full season in junior in his last season with the Knights, and good thing. So he had a full season, and then they went all the way to the OHL final. So that was like some really important extra games for him. And obviously last season in Laval, he played a full year. So he's getting there. I don't know if he's fully NHL ready. I think we'll have a better idea with his NHL camp. The rest of the top 10, Joshua Roy, Michael Hage, Owen Beck, Oliver Kapanen, Adam Engstrom, a lot to like here. Joshua was a guy me personally, I had no time for in his draft year. So sometimes, player can change. Mostly for him to me, the skating was a huge issue. The compete was a huge issue. And usually if you have both of those things as a question mark, it's usually not a good sign. But for him, he did start competing a bit more, and it really helped his game. But he's such a smart player. He can play, with anybody on the team. He can be on your first line. Like he did really well with Connor Bedard at the U20. But he can also play on the third line here. He could be on the third line in Montreal. That could be his future role here in the NHL. So he's an interesting one. How it was not looking good for him based on his first 2 year in the queue, but he did a complete 180, and then start like becoming like a more complete good hockey player. Oliver Kapanen was not a guy that we think too highly of. During his draft year, we didn't like the skating, and he was quite I would say average, if I'm not being nice here, in international tournament in his draft year. So I guess that didn't really help his cause with us. Still, the skating is still, it's a bit better, but it's still probably the weaker part of his game. But he just had a pretty solid season in Finland. He's in Montreal for the camp, but if he doesn't make the team, he's going back. He's going to go play in Sweden this year, I believe in Timrå. So he moved there from Finland this past season. He had a great playoff run in Finland. I believe he led the league in scoring in the playoffs. So very interesting player. Adam Engstrom also very, very interesting player. One of our biggest myths at Hockey Prospect. Not a player we knew a whole lot about during his draft year, and the crazy story here is that he was playing for Djurgården when they had Haslund, Lekaramaki, Odelius, Ogren, and we completely missed on him. It was pretty funny. The year after his draft, he's at the World Junior, and I saw maybe 5-6 shift, and I'm like, oh, that's a big miss, and we're in trouble with that one, because he looked like, with his size and his skating ability and his puck skills, he looked like a guy that was, if he's not a top 32 pick in a redraft, he's not far off. That's a bit of my viewpoint on the Canadiens. Brad, anybody you want to touch on the Canadiens top 10 here?
Adam Engstrom, to Jerome's point, one of the biggest misses we ever had. He's one of those scouting lessons for all you younger scouts out there that want to learn from where we made a mistake. Is like, if we're honing in on so many other players, you kind of drown out the rest of the team. And we did that. And that was, it was one of the biggest misses we ever had. Like, I almost don't want to highlight it. It's that painful. It's that bad. But we will. That's what we do. We don't mind actually. No excuses. We'll explain to you what happened or why and try to learn from it. But Adam Engstrom for us, that's one where I'll always shake my head. I can't get over the fact that we missed him that badly when watching that many games with that team. I mean, he might end up better than all of them. He might end up the best player out of any of those players from that year with Oslin and co. So it's just it's a ridiculous miss, to be honest. It's one of those situations where from a scouting perspective, that's one you got to emotionally integrate and be like, okay, you can't rationalize this. You can never let this type of thing happen again. So props to Montreal. Fantastic pickup in the third round by them. And their system is top to bottom stacked. They have so many different types of unique players. Defensemen, they're stacked at defense. That's why they could they traded. Who did they trade to Columbus again, Jerome, recently?
Jordan Harris.
Jordan Harris. If you can just trade up Jordan Harris, you're doing well on the blue line. Jordan Harris has a lot of potential, tremendous skater. So if you're willing to say goodbye to that to get enigmatic sniper who's coming off a couple of difficult years psychologically, you're stacked at the position. That's what they did. So yeah, good. Just full steam ahead. It's exciting too. Montreal, like, hockey's not the same unless Montreal is doing well to me. That's just the way it is. Like, it's exciting for San Jose to get a dynamic team coming in, but Montreal, it's one of those organizations where it's just not. You got to have a good hockey team in Montreal, and now it's going to be emerging again here shortly. So it's really, really good times for Montreal fans. Super excited.
All right, let's move on to the next team, the Ottawa Senators. So we go from a team who was stacked with their prospect pool to a team that is not stacked. Carter Yakimchuk, the obvious number one ranked player here. We talked a lot about him last year in our pre-draft video. Matt Sogard is a guy that we really liked way back in 2019. Let's go back to what we said about Sebastian Cossa with the Red Wings. Those 6'6", 6'7" goalie, just be patient. They might not be ready until they might not be NHL ready until they're 23, 24, 25, even 26. But it's gonna, if you believe in the player, it's gonna pay off. You just have to be patient. The rest of the prospect pool, a lot of like Tyler Clevin is very a toolsy defenseman, but the hockey sense is the big drawback to his game. If he can, learn to process the game better and manage the puck better under pressure, that's going to be the key for him. If he can do that, he might, become like a third pairing, shutdown physical defenseman. Ostapchuk, Merrilainen, Boucher. I mean, Tyler Boucher, we really love in this draft year. Obviously, we didn't love him at 10 overall, but we had time for him because he's a very unique power forward. Like, we always say Tom Wilson, but not Tom Wilson, but something, something in the same style, like as a right winger who can really skate, can really hit. And Tyler, his playmaking was very underrated in his draft year, so that's why we ranked him at 26. But he's been I feel like every year since his draft year, he has got hurt, and it just those young players, they need to play to develop. So you're not going to get better sitting, not playing and being hurt and not even being able to practice. So that's really it really sucks for the Sens and for Tyler. And the rest of the top 10, I think Stefan Holiday is an interesting one. Just turned pro after playing at Ohio State. Saw him a bit in the American Hockey League. His playmaking was really good, but obviously the skating is the big drawback here. But I was really impressed with his playmaking and some of the way he thinks the game. So maybe that will help him reach the NHL, even though he's not a good skater. So Brad, anybody on on Ottawa you wanna focus here on their top 10?
I think Zach Ostapchuk actually plays. That's something. This organization, let's talk about the before and after, right? A lot of their staff was let go. They have a new staff. So we really only have one draft to really look at the new regime. But the old regime, they had a very standard general philosophy of like north-south power forward style players. That's what they wanted. That's what Tyler Boucher was supposed to be. I can't remember the Swede they drafted a couple of drafts back. Is Pettersson, I think, third round. I think he plays for Rogla.
Oscar Pettersson, yeah.
Oscar Pettersson. So a very north-south power skater. Tyler Boucher, north-south power skater. Zach Ostapchuk, north-south. Right now, Ostapchuk, the difference between them is he's a bit more toolsy, a lot more range on him, and his curve is a bit better. So he's the one that actually seems to like be the player that's going to hit for them. This has been an organization with an extreme amount of difficulty finding finesse-oriented forwards that actually play. Robbie Horventi, I'll never forget when they passed up on JJ Peterka for him. I did a 3-hour podcast for a Senators podcast. I remember it happening. I was like, I'm just so sorry. Like, Tim Stützle's running mate, and he's right there for you, and you toss him away for Roby. So those types of errors are the reason that I think the old staff was let go. But there's always surprises. Maybe Jordan Donovan can be a surprise. Stephen Holiday, player who really USHL is so slow. You just get drowned out. The pace of play would get to him, and he really didn't look like much. And he's developing. Maybe Stephen Holiday becomes a pretty unique power forward in the NHL if things go right, or at least something, right? So it's not the system it should be, but Yakimchuk is definitely one of the most interesting defensemen there is right now from a prospect perspective in the sport. Like, he could be an amazing player if things go right. If everything goes right for him, he'll be outstanding. And to Jerome's point, Matt Sogard, I know for some of you, your patience is wearing thin. Don't worry, Ottawa fans. It can take a very long time before you really know what you're getting with a 6'7" player. Mads looked better last year in the AHL. He looked the best he's ever been in the AHL last year. So I know he struggled in the NHL, but it was Ottawa. Their defense was a total mess, as you know. So it's one of those situations where he needs a bit more time. You won't know what he is for another 2 years. Like, he needs a lot of time, but you might get something. Levi Merilainen was a player I was high on, then I was low on. Now I'm in between on. So he's all over the map for me. I think he might be a backup, which wouldn't hurt you. But I mean, you got all marked there now anyway, so it's not a huge deal. But yeah, just it's not the crop should be. There's players here with like unique properties within their power games, but it's largely untapped, and it's really going to depend on Boucher's development, and if Ostapchuk develops correctly and can get to the NHL, and if Tyler Clevin can stop going just glassing out. Can Tyler Clevin just become a cleaner defenseman when it comes to his exits? And if that happens, then maybe you get something out of this team.
Moving on to the Tampa Bay Lightning, we mentioned early on about the Boston Bruins being very good with development. Tampa Bay is the same thing. They don't have a lot of picks, obviously, so they have to really work on improving the skill of the actual draft pick that they have. And they're one of the teams that we mentioned before in the previous episode. They don't care about the skating. They'll draft you. If they think you can be a player, they'll work with your skating. They have done some pretty solid work with some of their players' skating over the last few years. So obviously with Connor Geeky, they didn't draft him. They got him for Sergachev. He's an interesting one. Big toolsy center. Maybe the upside is not as high as we originally thought. He was going to be like a premier center at the NHL level. But when we figured that out, we definitely try to put him in a place in our rankings that was, I feel like he's probably going to be more of a third line center. After him, you look at Isaac Howard. He's a super flashy scoring winger. He had a tough first year in college, Minnesota Duluth. He moved to Michigan State. He had a solid season there. He was great at the U20. He's still somewhat of a boom bust type player. If it works, he's going to be like a 25, 30 goal guy at the NHL level. But it might not work out for him. So it remains to be seen what's really going to be his future like. Ethan Gauthier, a hardworking forward from the Q. Just the upside is not really high. He does play in big games. He has back-to-back year where his team went. Last year they won the championship. The year prior they won in the Q semifinal. So he has played a lot of hockey the last 2 years. He's gonna have to improve his skating a bit, his skill also. He's got one last year in the Q. Very good chance he gets traded out of Drummondville at some point this season for obviously a team that is looking to win the Q championship this year. Maxim Groshev is a guy that we like. Big kid out of Russia who can really skate. He's doing his thing in the American Hockey League, but he's gonna have to at least try to come close to play for Tampa Bay at some point, because usually Russian prospects are not going to stay like 4 or 5 years in the American Hockey League. So and Dylan Duke, speaking of guy that had like bad skating in his draft year, Tampa Bay didn't care. They still took him, and they're working on improving his skating. Nico Utanen, same thing. And Noah Steen, just the last guy I'm going to mention here, from Norway. Norway had a pretty spectacular draft last season with Nygaard, Solberg, and Noah Steen was a 7th round pick by Tampa Bay. He's a third-year eligible player, so he's an interesting one. He might become like a 4th-line PK guy at the NHL level. He loved to compete. He's got some skill. He skates well. He could be. He's playing in Sweden this season in the SHL. So I'm not sure what will be the plan as far how many years he's going to be in the SHL before moving to North America. But he's not a bad 7th round pick for Tampa Bay. Brad?
Yeah, to your point, underrated 7th round pick. Steen was playing with Branson Nygaard. And who's the other Norwegian there, Jerome, that I had a ton of time for? I think I ranked him every year. I was like, he's going to get drafted in the 7th one of these years. I can't remember his name. But yeah, they had a trio there in Norway, and they all came through Mora's system together. And then they got put on a Svensken line together, almost like a Norwegian kid line. And so Noah Steen's development has been pretty solid. It was one of those situations where we discussed how there was potential. We thought that if he wasn't drafted, he was going to get signed either way. So I think it's a pretty good 7th round pick by Tampa. It's one of those underrated ones where it could actually really pan out and you get something. But the real like wild card for me is Maxim Groshev. Like Groshev, it took him a couple of years to get online, and like that's not unexpected because he was getting such limited minutes in the KHL. Again, like development strategy over in the KHL is so different than it is in North America. Like he was accelerated because his north-south skating is incredible. And so it was one of those situations where he had the skating and the frame to stay up, but then he didn't get the reps in to really develop as a player until this past season. But he looked pretty good. Like he had a run there. I think it was like through November where he was incredible. He's unstoppable for a bit. So he just needs to continue to get comfortable in North American ice. He was fantastic internationally for Russia. Both his U20 performances to me were very good. So if you can get that, if you can draw that out and turn that into a 3rd liner in the NHL, that is a home run pick for Tampa. And I think it's possible. I really do. I'm a fan of Groshev. I have a ton of time for him. So he's one. The other is Huttunen. Nico Huttunen is the worst skater that is not playing in the NHL that is currently drafted. If Tampa Bay can get him to at least never adequate, but baseline so that he can actually play in the NHL, one, skating coaches deserve a raise because that is a feat all into itself, but it's also going to be very intriguing because he is one of these real scorers in their prospect pool. Like he's somebody who legitimately can put up 25 goals for a team if things go right here. So Huttunen is supplemental offense that they desperately need. Maxim Groshev is also that in a different sense. And then I think Noah Steen is the other one for me where you kind of look at long-term what he could be. I think there's potential for him to at least be a depth player in some capacity. Obviously with their top guys, like Howard had a better season. That was expected and needed. And then Geekie, yeah, we're super high on Geekie. We thought the sky was the limit, and it turns out we were, there was no sky to begin with. Like, he's going to be a third-line player. So, unfortunately, it just, you look at a player like him, and you're like, okay, if this kid figures out how to execute and become a dual threat, he's going to be special. But unfortunately, that just really hasn't happened. That doesn't mean he won't be useful, though. That does not mean he will not have a lot of versatility and still be a useful player at the NHL level, just not at the level. We thought he could be a star when we first really started watching him. And obviously that's very unlikely at this time, but hey, as you said, Tampa Bay system, they always find ways to develop players. Maybe they managed to increase Geekie's potential here long-term again.
Yeah. And just to answer your question, the other Norway player was Peter Westerheim.
No, there was Westerheim. Thank you. Yeah, that's him. Peter Westerheim. I am surprised that Westerheim was not drafted and Noah Steen is. I will say that. Peter Westerheim's very unique, specialized defensive forward. But I mean, my player comp for him was Kiviranta. So Yoel Kiviranta was a fourth-line player. So, but I think Kiviranta is an underrated player. When he played like Colorado, he's fantastic when he's called up to Colorado there. So, yeah, that was kind of my player comp for him. But we'll see. We'll see what happens with Westerheim if he gets signed.
All right, let's move on to the Toronto Maple Leaf, which will be the last thing we do in this episode. So, Easton Cowan, Dennis Haldeby, Fraser Minton, Nikita Grebryankin, which I guess now is Grebankin, based on the Toronto roster that I saw this past weekend. Timofey Obvinza, Ben Danford, Topi Niemela, Ryan Threberg, Noah Chadwick, Akhtiamov, also a Russian goalie that I saw this past weekend in Montreal. Obviously, Easton Cowan is their top guy. He looks like if he's not NHL ready, he's very close to it. Quite a story, because in his draft year, nobody talked about him except us. Very smart hockey player, high compete guy, understand how to play in all three zones. He went to the Hunter School of Hockey. A bit annoying to play against too. He doesn't back down. He has a lot of pushback. His skating has really improved if you compare to what he was at the beginning of his draft year to what he is now. Like there's quite of a massive improvement here. A lot of people think he's going to play in the NHL this season. I think he's going to get his 9 games, and we'll see. We'll see if he stay. Maybe he stay until early December, and then he goes play for Canada at the U20. I don't know, but I'd be surprised if he doesn't get at least 9 games to start the year. He was dominant last season with London. He was basically getting points every game he played last season. I'll let you talk about Dennis Haldeby, maybe Brad. So I'm not going to touch on him, but I just saw him play a pretty good game against the Montreal rookies. He gave like one really bad goal to Owen Beck, but the rest of the game he was pretty good. Toronto won the game, but Montreal was clearly the better team, and they won a lot because of Haldeby. Fraser Minton is an interesting one. Him and Cowan really play well together. It's like the second straight training camp that they have shown like really good chemistry. He had a good camp last year in Toronto. Actually made the team as a 19 years old, and then he was sent back to the WHL, and then didn't really play well in WHL when he came back. Did not play well at the U20 for Team Canada. He was the captain. He didn't really play well. So he's an interesting one. I don't know if he's going to play with the Leaf to start the season, but he's definitely should be one of the first few call up if he doesn't make the team out of camp. And then Topi Niemela, maybe I'll quickly mention him. Smart defenseman. He fits the mold of what Toronto used to like in defensemen with Sandin, Rasmus Sandin, the other Swedish defenseman Liljegren. So those small / average size defensemen that think the game well, but their foot speed, their skating is hurting them, and more those type of defensemen, they don't have as much chance to play at the NHL level. So it's he thinks the game well, but just the skating is what's lacking a bit for him. And I don't know if that's going to translate to being a full-time NHLer down the line.
Yeah, I know for some of you reading this or seeing this, you're like, Topi Niemelä 7, that's low. We still believe defense wins championships. We really do. We think Colorado, the team that won the cup recently, is more of an outlier than it is going to be the norm. Suffocating defense really helps win championships. Topi Niemelä is the opposite of that. Topi Niemelä's defensive play might keep him from really ever being able to play. We still think that there is a lot of variance with what he could become as a result of that. That's why he's a bit lower. We could absolutely be wrong on it, but that's the reason. We just want to give some clarity as to why he's a bit lower than maybe some of you would expect. But yeah, like Toronto's drafting strategy seems to be pretty similar to ours in some ways, like from Matthew Nyes to Easton Cow and Dennis Hildeby, Nikita Grabenkin and Timofey Aventsev. The list goes on. A lot of overlap here with what we look for and how we evaluate players. So Dennis Hildeby, I know some of you might be a little high. I think of him as a starter, which is why he's ranked as high as he is. He is a very impressive goalie. There's very little missing. He's calm, he's cool, collected, poised, reads the game relatively well, fantastic on his edges relative to his size, excellent weight transfers, has fantastic lateral agility, knows how to use his reverse VH correctly, has exaggerated shoulder posture so he can take up the top corners of the net when he needs to, when he's down his reverse VH. His butterfly, his mechanics are good. The only real issue I had, or it's like, oh, this is the unknown, is the low glove long term. Low glove was exploited at the SHL. It has been corrected for to a degree since he's come over to the AHL. And then the consistency rates. When he's playing well, it's kind of Brendan Bussey. It's like when they're playing well, they look like bona fide starters. But then there's games where they just melt, and then you're worried about the potential for them to be able to live up to that expectation. But Hildeby's young. I really believe that he is tracking correctly. He's been fantastic the last 3 seasons. So that's a huge one for you guys. The other is Timofey Aventsev. I think you have probably, like, for all Toronto fans listening to this, I think you're probably the most underrated goalie prospect pool. If you take Hildeby, Aventsev, and Ekpatayimov, that's a very underrated crop. I know for a lot of you don't know who Timofey Aventsev is. He was our, what do we rank him?
Fifth
fifth
rank.
Fifth rank goalie. I'm a little more bullish than even that. I'm a huge believer in this kid. Incredibly unique. He's kind of a Brendan Bussey, Alex Georgiev hybrid, meaning like he has a stand-up hybrid style, which is very unique for a 6'4" goalie. He's hyper athletic, very reflexive, fantastic skating base, kind of raw still, but he's off to a good start in Krasny. He's splitting there. But I think there is the ceiling's very high. So Hildeby more likely to play. You could argue offensive ceiling is even higher than Hildeby. So that's how I kind of look at the goalies. And you look at Nikita Grabenkin. This was a player that we've talked a lot today, Jerome, and yesterday or the day before about misses, and we've had several. And Anna Minstrom comes to mind as one that I'll never live down. But in our defense, Nikita Grabenkin is a player. We're the only staff that had him ranked, and I bring that up because he was playing with Danila Yurov. So that's one the industry really just missed, because it's not like they didn't see him. So I was incredibly bullish on Grabenkin in his draft season. He's only accelerated his development. The big issue with him is kind of like Oliver Bjorkstrand. When Oliver Bjorkstrand hit Columbus, one issue that Tortorella had with him was his ability to fight through checks along the boards. That was an issue with Nikita Grabenkin until he got to the KHL and played full time with Metalors. Now that's changed. Now Grabenkin is filled out. He's a lot more powerful. He's a lot more comfortable taking checks, absorbing hits. So the contact aspect has improved dramatically, which really helps him because his game is predicated off of being able to make plays down low. He is a brilliant player on his edges. I've seen some breakdowns of this player, and I feel like he's misinterpreted. So Nikita Grabenkin is almost like an Allen Iverson style skater, meaning he's somebody who crosses up opposing defensemen and puts them off balance. And he actually is the player with some of the best cross-ups I've seen in terms of being able to put defensemen off balance at range and distance. He takes advantage of that and uses the net to try to find lateral high-danger passing plays. So he's a driver he's a possession driver that uses his edge work and handling combination with his vision to set up his teammates in high-danger positions. I think that could be extraordinarily useful for some of the players that Toronto has right now. So look for Grabenkin to be more impactful than some people might think, and it might happen as soon as the season. And I think Fraser Minton's underrated. Jerome, I'm with you. I think Fraser Minton's a great player. And Millie, this we go back again. We missed him. We never got to him until way too late in the season, and then we were just out of time. But he looked decent to us at that time. We would have ranked him, but not in the right spot, admittedly. But then I watching him after that, it was pretty evident quickly that we had a miss on our hands. So good job by Toronto staff to pinpoint him. And it's a bit of an underrated crop. I think this is an underrated group of prospects. But again, you won't find people higher than us on Hildaby, Grabank, and Vince of Easton Cowan. We were the only staff that had him ranked aggressively high, at least publicly. So we're big believers in what Toronto's doing.
Yeah, the only guy maybe we're not as high on him was Ben Danford, which the Leafs draft in the first round, and we watched him quite a bit. Him and Morelli, the two draft eligible on the Oshawa, we watched him a lot, and we just never couldn't get on board with Danford. That doesn't mean we're right or we're wrong. It just we'll see what happens with him. But it's just in his draft here, we just could get on board with Ben Danford. So it's going to be interesting to see. Unfortunately, he was injured in the rookie camp, so I didn't get to see him play against Montreal. But obviously, we're gonna see him in Oshawa during the upcoming season. So that will wrap up episode number 3 here on the Atlantic Division. Thanks for watching, and obviously please like this video, subscribe to our channel. It's going to help us make it more popular, and maybe at some point we can actually do some live streaming on YouTube and other cool stuff that we could do. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you for episode 4 tomorrow when we talk about the Metropolitan Division.